My name is Vivian Beaumont. I'm 31 years old and I work as a residential home inspector in Charleston. My life has always been built on structure. Early mornings, detailed reports, crawling through attics, checking foundations, making sure nothing is overlooked before people make the biggest financial decisions of their lives. I've always believed that kind of precision should apply to relationships too. That if you pay attention to the small things, you can prevent bigger problems later. That belief is exactly what made everything fall apart. Daniel is 29, my boyfriend. Or he was. We had been together for just over 3 years, long enough to build routines, inside jokes, shared habits. Long enough that people stopped asking if we were serious and started asking when the wedding was. The venue was already booked. Deposits paid. We had been living together for nearly a year in the townhouse I rented before he moved in. Our life wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was already in motion. At least, that's what I thought. I'm sharing this because I need clarity, but also because every time I tried to talk about it, the conversation somehow turned into something else. According to Daniel, nothing was wrong. According to him, I was imagining patterns that didn't exist. But patterns don't come out of nowhere. They build. And once you see them clearly, you can't unsee them. The issue wasn't something dramatic. No obvious cheating. No single moment I could point to and say, that's where everything broke. It was Olivia, his ex-girlfriend. She's 33, single, and the kind of woman who never fully leaves a person's life. She just changes roles and stays close enough to matter. At first, I told myself it was normal. People can stay friends with their exes. I'm not the type to control who someone talks to or spends time with. I even met her early on, stayed polite, included her when it made sense. But there's a difference between being present and being prioritized. And slowly, almost invisibly, she became part of everything. Morning coffee before work. Gym check-ins, long phone calls that stretched late into the night, random errands that somehow turned into half-day plans. If Daniel had a bad day, she knew before I did. If something good happened, she heard it first. I didn't notice it all at once. That's the part that still bothers me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was subtle enough that every time I questioned it, I could talk myself out of it. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe this is just how they are. Maybe I need to be more secure. But then small things started stacking up. He canceled plans with me twice in 1 month because of her. Once because she had a rough day. Once because she didn't want to go to an event alone. And both times he said it like it was reasonable. Like I should understand. Meanwhile, if I asked for one evening without his phone lighting up with her messages every few minutes, I became the problem. You're making things weird, Vivian. That's what he said. Weird. Like wanting to feel like I mattered in my own relationship was some kind of disruption. What bothered me most wasn't anything physical. It wasn't flirting. It was ranking. There's a difference between being loved and being second. And I could feel it even when I couldn't prove it. For a while, I tried to adjust. I told myself relationships require compromise. That maybe this was just something I needed to accept. But deep down, something didn't sit right. It felt like I was standing just outside my own relationship, close enough to see everything, but not fully inside it. Like I was adjacent. And the worst part, Daniel acted like everything was normal. Like I was the only one noticing something was off. That kind of quiet denial does something to you. It makes you question your own instincts. It makes you hesitate before speaking up. It makes you wonder if maybe you're the one slowly breaking something that was never broken to begin with. But patterns don't lie. And eventually they become too clear to ignore. For me, that moment came at a dinner. A normal night. 10 people. Casual setting, nothing dramatic. But sometimes it's not the big moments that reveal the truth. It's the small ones, when you finally start paying attention. Tessa's house sits just outside downtown, one of those renovated older homes where everything looks effortless, but you can tell every detail has been planned down to the smallest inch. Soft lighting, open kitchen, the kind of place where conversations overlap and people move easily from room to room. There were about 10 of us that night, Mostly Daniel's friends, a few partners. I didn't know everyone well, but I knew enough to blend in, smile, stay engaged. We arrived together. But somehow, within minutes, it didn't feel like we were together at all. Olivia showed up about 20 minutes later, and I remember the exact moment she walked in. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because of how Daniel reacted. He didn't rush to her. He didn't say anything out of line. But something shifted. His posture, his attention, the way his entire focus tilted, just slightly, in her direction. It was subtle. But once you notice something like that, you can't unsee it. I stayed consistent. I greeted her, smiled, kept everything polite. She greeted me the same way, warm, casual, like there was nothing unusual about any of this. And maybe that's what made it harder. Nothing was openly wrong, which meant everything wrong had to be felt instead of proven. We settled into the evening, drinks in hand, small conversations forming and dissolving. People moved between the kitchen and the living room, laughter filling the space in bursts. And slowly, almost predictably, Daniel drifted toward Olivia. Not dramatically, just proximity, standing close, leaning in to talk, sharing something on his phone, laughing in a way that felt more personal than the rest of the room. I made a point not to hover. I talked to other people, asked questions, stayed involved, but I was paying attention. About an hour in, I realized something that made my chest tighten slightly. I had barely spoken to him. Every time I looked over, he was mid-conversation with her. Not a group conversation, always just the two of them, angled slightly away from everyone else, like the rest of us were background noise. At one point, I walked into the kitchen to refill my drink. They were already there. Close enough that I caught the end of what Olivia was saying. She mentioned a place they used to go to all the time, some small cafe I'd never heard of. Then she added, casually, almost like it was a shared joke, "It hasn't been the same since you moved in with her." Her. Not Vivian. Not your girlfriend. Just her. I felt it immediately. Not anger. Not even jealousy. Just displacement. Daniel laughed, softly. Familiar, like it was an accepted truth between them. And what stayed with me wasn't that he laughed. It was what he didn't do. He didn't correct her. He didn't include me. He didn't even acknowledge that I was standing right there. I stepped closer, keeping my tone neutral. "What are you two talking about?" Daniel glanced at me, just briefly, then gave a short summary. Clean, simplified, stripped of context. Like I was being updated on something I wasn't actually part of. Olivia added a detail. But again, it was framed in a way that assumed shared history I didn't belong to. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not emotionally. Structurally, I didn't react. I didn't call it out. I just stepped back and started watching more carefully. Because one moment can be explained away. But patterns? Patterns don't need interpretation. Over the next 40 minutes, I saw the same thing repeat itself. Inside jokes I didn't understand. References to memories I wasn't part of. The kind of ease that doesn't come from casual friendship. It comes from something that's been consistently maintained. And then Tessa said something. From across the room, half laughing, half teasing. "So Daniel, are you still splitting your weekends the same way?" It landed like a joke. Everyone smiled. But I didn't, because I saw the way Daniel reacted. Too quick. Too controlled. He brushed it off immediately, changed the subject before it could settle. And Olivia didn't say anything at all. That silence, it said more than any explanation could have. I didn't ask questions. Not there. Not in front of everyone. I stayed through the rest of the dinner. Smiled when I needed to, contributed just enough to not stand out. But inside, everything was rearranging. By the time we got in the car, I already knew what I was going to do. I wasn't going to sit with this. I wasn't going to let it turn into something vague and deniable. I needed clarity, and I needed it that night. The drive home was quiet, not tense, just empty. Daniel didn't notice anything different. Or if he did, he didn't acknowledge it. When we pulled into the driveway, I turned off the engine and sat there for a second longer than usual, just enough to steady myself. Because once I asked the question, There would be no going back to uncertainty, only answers. And inside the townhouse, everything felt normal, too normal. He kicked off his shoes, walked straight into the kitchen, already scrolling through his phone like the night had been completely uneventful, like nothing had shifted, like I hadn't just watched my place in his life become negotiable. I gave it a minute. Then I followed him in. "Daniel," I said quietly, "can we talk?" He sighed before I even finished the sentence. And somehow, that small reaction told me everything about how this was going to go. Still, I asked anyway, because some things need to be said out loud, even when you already know the answer. He didn't look up right away, still scrolling, still relaxed. Like this was already an inconvenience. That was the first signal. Not what he said, but how little urgency he gave to the fact that I needed to talk. I leaned lightly against the counter, keeping my tone steady. "I've been noticing something for a while," I said, "and tonight just made it clearer." He let out a quiet breath through his nose, like he was bracing for something unnecessary. "Vivian," he muttered, dragging my name slightly, already tired of a conversation that hadn't even started. I ignored that. "I think you're getting too close to Olivia," I continued, "in ways that don't feel appropriate for someone who's about to get married." That was it. Direct. No accusations, just observation. He finally looked up. And the expression on his face wasn't confusion. It was confirmation. Not of what I was saying, but of what he already believed about me. He leaned back slightly against the counter, arms folding across his chest. "You're being insecure," he said. Flat. Immediate. Like a diagnosis. Not defensive, not emotional. Just dismissive. I felt something in my chest tighten, not because of what he said, but because of how quickly he said it. No pause, no consideration, just a label. "I'm not talking about feelings," I replied calmly. "I'm talking about patterns." I listed them. The time he spent with her, the late calls, the canceled plans, the way I kept getting pushed to the side without it ever being acknowledged. I even brought up tonight, the conversation in the kitchen, the comment about weekends, every detail I could remember laid out clearly. He didn't engage with any of it. Not really. Every example I gave became something else. "You're overthinking." It wasn't like that. "You're taking things out of context." He didn't deny the behavior. He just reframed it, turned it into something harmless, and turned me into the problem for noticing it. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a difference in how we defined the relationship. So I made it simple. "I'm not trying to compete with anyone," I said, "but I need to understand where I stand." He exhaled again, slower this time, like I was forcing him into a conversation he didn't want to have. "You're making this into something it's not," he said. "I'm asking you directly," I replied. "Where do I stand compared to her?" That was the moment everything narrowed. No distractions. No room to redirect. Just a question. Clear. Unavoidable. He held my gaze for a second, and I could see it. The slight irritation, the reluctance, not because the answer was hard, but because I was asking for it. "If you're going to frame it like that," he said slowly, "then you need to be ready for the answer." I didn't move. "Okay," I said. "I am." There was no hesitation, no softening, no attempt to cushion what came next. "If you make me choose," he said, "I'll choose her. Every time." Just like that. No pause, no regret, delivered like a simple fact. The room went quiet. Not dramatically, just still. And in that stillness, something inside me settled. Not shattered, not broken. Settled. Because for the first time, everything made sense. The patterns. The distance, the way I had been slowly repositioned in my own relationship. It wasn't confusion, it was clarity I had been avoiding. I didn't argue. There was nothing to argue. I nodded once. "Okay," I said, and I meant it. Not okay as in acceptance, but okay as in understood. I turned and walked upstairs, not to cool off, not to think things through again. That part was already done. The only thing left was action. People like to say decisions like that are emotional, impulsive, but this wasn't. He gave me a clear answer, and I treated it as reliable information. I went straight to the closet, pulled out boxes, and started packing his things. Not a bag, not something temporary, everything. Shirts, jackets, shoes, folding each piece carefully, placing them into boxes like I was organizing inventory instead of ending a relationship. There was something grounding about the process, methodical, controlled. 10 minutes later, he appeared in the doorway, and I remember the exact look on his face. Not panic, not confusion, annoyance. "What are you doing?" he asked. Like I was creating a problem that didn't need to exist. I didn't stop moving. "If you're choosing her every time," I said, "then there's no reason for you to stay here as my boyfriend." He frowned slightly, stepping further into the room. "Vivian, you're overreacting," he said. "It was one sentence." I shook my head, still folding his clothes. "It wasn't one sentence," I replied. "It was a pattern. That sentence just confirmed it." He let out a short laugh, disbelief mixed with irritation. "So what, you're just going to throw everything away because of how you interpreted something?" I paused for the first time, looked at him directly. "I didn't interpret anything," I said. "I asked you a question. You answered it." That landed, not emotionally, but logically, and I could see it in the way his expression shifted, just slightly. He tried to adjust. "You gave me an ultimatum," he said. "What did you expect me to say?" I shook my head again. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't give you anything. I asked where I stood. You told me." I went back to packing. Steady. Consistent. That's what made it real. Not yelling. Not fighting. Just movement. At one point, he told me to stop. Like I would pause. Reconsider. Take it back. I didn't. I finished the bedroom. Then moved through the rest of the townhouse. Kitchen items he had brought in. Personal things in the living room. Everything separated cleanly. No overlap. No excuses to come back later. When I was done, I carried everything downstairs and placed it by the door. Then I turned to him. "You can call someone to pick you up," I said, "or get a ride, but you're not staying here tonight." He stared at me, waiting. For hesitation, for doubt. For something, but there wasn't anything left to give because the decision had already been made. The moment he chose her, he didn't move right away, just stood there, looking at the boxes by the door like they didn't belong to him. Like if he waited long enough, I would undo everything. "I think you're making a mistake," he said finally. Not angry, not emotional, just mildly irritated, like I had chosen the most inconvenient option. I didn't respond because at that point, explanations would only turn into debates, and I wasn't debating anything anymore. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the living room. "This is exactly what I meant," he added. "You take something small and blow it up into this." I watched him for a second, really watched him. And what struck me wasn't what he was saying, it was what he wasn't. No apology. No attempt to clarify. No effort to reassure me that I mattered. Just frustration that I had acted on what he told me. "I'm not blowing anything up," I said calmly. "I'm responding to what you said." He scoffed lightly. "You're acting like I said I don't care about you." I held his gaze. "You said you'd choose her every time." Silence. Brief, but enough. Because there's no way to reframe that without changing the meaning. He looked away first. That told me everything I needed to know. "I didn't mean it like that," he muttered. But he didn't explain what he did mean, and I didn't ask, because I had already given him the chance to be clear, and he had taken it. Just not in the way he expected it to matter. I stepped aside slightly, giving him space near the door. "You should call someone," I said. "It's getting late." That was the moment something shifted in him. Not regret, not realization, just acceptance that I wasn't going to bend. He grabbed his phone, already typing, his movements sharper now. I didn't ask who he was contacting. It didn't matter. 10 minutes later, he picked up one of the boxes, then another, paused at the door, like there was something he wanted to say. But whatever it was, he didn't say it. He just left, and I closed the door behind him, locked it, and that was it. No dramatic ending. No final words. Just a clean break. The next morning, I canceled the wedding. Every vendor, every booking, every deposit that could be recovered. Within 48 hours, everything was shut down. His number, blocked. Olivia's number, blocked. Any shared subscriptions, accounts, access, removed. Not out of anger, just completion. When you remove someone from your life that quickly, you don't leave loose ends. You close everything at once. The first week was quieter than I expected. No messages, no unknown numbers, no mutual friends reaching out, nothing. And somehow that silence confirmed something I hadn't fully allowed myself to admit yet. He didn't fight for me, not even once. From a practical standpoint, things were simple. He had taken everything that was clearly his. A few small things were left behind, items that had blended into the space over time, but nothing important enough to justify reopening contact. I boxed them up and placed them in a closet. Then I moved on. Work helped. My job doesn't allow for distraction. If I miss something during an inspection, it affects someone else's life. So during the day, I stayed focused. Details, measurements, reports. And by the time I got home, I was too tired to replay conversations. There were moments when the absence was noticeable, but not in the way people describe heartbreak. It wasn't emotional. It was logistical. Less noise, less movement, fewer groceries, no background phone calls filling the evenings. The space felt controlled. About 2 weeks in, I ran into Tessa at a coffee shop near one of my inspection sites. It wasn't planned. She recognized me first. We exchanged the usual, small talk, polite smiles. Then she hesitated slightly, like she was deciding whether to ask. "What happened?" she said finally, her tone careful. I didn't give her the full story, just the core of it. "I asked Daniel where I stood compared to Olivia," I said, and he answered. She nodded slowly. Not surprised. That was the part that stayed with me. She didn't defend him, didn't try to soften it, didn't say I misunderstood. She just accepted it. "That makes sense," she said quietly. I tilted my head slightly. "What does that mean?" She paused. Just for a second, like she was deciding how much to say. "Things between them have always been complicated," she admitted. Not dramatic, not detailed, but enough. Enough to confirm that what I had seen wasn't new, wasn't sudden. It had been there long before I forced it into the open. I didn't ask for more, because at that point, it wouldn't have changed anything. If anything, it just made one thing clearer. I hadn't overreacted. I had probably waited longer than I should have. By the end of the first month, everything felt settled, not emotionally resolved, but structurally complete. No contact. No overlap. No unfinished pieces. So when 4 months passed without hearing anything, I assumed that was permanent. Which is why, when there was a knock on my door one Tuesday night around 8, I wasn't expecting it to be him. And I definitely wasn't expecting what came with him. When I opened the door, Daniel looked different. Not drastically, but noticeably. Tired. Worn down. Like something hadn't gone the way he thought it would. His posture was off, shoulders slightly forward, arms held close like he was trying to contain something. And then I saw it, not on him, but in the space around him. The hesitation, the urgency, the reason he was there. And before he even said a word, I knew this wasn't a visit. This was a consequence. For a second, neither of us spoke. The hallway light behind me cast just enough shadow across his face to make him look older than I remembered. Not physically, but heavier. Like something had settled into him that hadn't been there before. "Vivian," he started, and then stopped. Like even saying my name felt unfamiliar now. I didn't step aside. I didn't invite him in. I stayed exactly where I was, one hand still on the door. "What do you need?" I asked. Not cold, just direct, because anything softer would have changed the tone of the conversation, and I wasn't willing to blur that line. He swallowed, glancing past me into the townhouse, like he expected something inside to still belong to him. It's a lot," he said. I didn't know where else to go. That sentence landed quietly. Not dramatic, but precise. Not, I wanted to see you. Not, I miss you. Just, I didn't know where else to go. I let a second pass, then asked the only question that mattered. Are you still with Olivia? His jaw tightened slightly. That was answer enough. But then he shook his head. No, he said. It didn't work out. Of course it didn't. I didn't say that out loud. I just nodded once, like I was filing information. And she's pregnant, I added. His eyes flicked back to mine. A brief hesitation, then another nod. Yes, there it was. Not a surprise. Just confirmation. Everything aligned too cleanly. The timeline. The distance that had already been there before we ended things. The way he had chosen her without hesitation. I didn't feel anger. That part had already passed months ago. What I felt was something quieter. Recognition. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. She left, he said. Or, I guess we both did. It just, everything got complicated. I wasn't ready for all of it. His voice dropped slightly at the end. Responsibility, that's what he meant. He wasn't ready for responsibility. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk. Because the more he said, the clearer everything became. She said she needed stability, he continued, and I couldn't give her that right now, not with everything going on. I almost smiled at that. Almost. Because the irony wasn't lost on me. Stability, that's what she wanted. That's what he couldn't provide. And now, that's exactly what brought him back here. I've been staying with a friend, he added quickly. Just temporary. I'm trying to figure things out, but he trailed off. Like the rest was obvious. Like I was supposed to fill in the blanks for him. I didn't. Instead, I asked one more question. Why are you here, Daniel? He looked at me then. Really looked. And for a moment, I saw something close to vulnerability, but it didn't last. You're the most stable person I know, he said. There it was. Clear. Unfiltered, and more honest than anything else he had said so far. Not, I love you. Not, I made a mistake. Not, I want us back. Just, you're stable. I felt something shift inside me. Not pain. Not even disappointment. Just clarity locking into place. He wasn't here because he chose me. He was here because his first choice failed. And I was what remained. I stayed in the doorway, deliberately, because stepping aside would have changed everything. And I wasn't confused about that. I understand your situation has changed, I said calmly, but mine hasn't. His expression tightened slightly, like that wasn't the direction he expected this to go. Vivian, come on, he said. It's not that simple. It is, I replied. He shook his head, stepping a little closer. You're acting like none of what we had matters, he said. Like it's just gone. I let him speak, but I didn't adjust. Because this wasn't about what we had. It was about what he chose. You made your position clear 4 months ago, I said, and I acted on it. That was different, he insisted quickly. This wasn't happening yet. I held his gaze. It doesn't change what you said. He exhaled sharply, frustration starting to edge into his voice. So that's it? You're just going to turn me away like this? I didn't react to the tone, just the question. Yes, I said. Simple. Final. He stared at me, like an explanation, a softening. But there wasn't anything else. You're being cold, he said after a moment. Anyone with basic decency wouldn't do this. I didn't argue with that, didn't defend myself. I just restated the boundary. I'm not responsible for fixing the consequences of your decisions, I said. His jaw tightened. That hit. Not emotionally, but logically, because there was no way around it. He tried once more. Different angle. We were supposed to get married, he said. Does that mean nothing to you now? That one lingered slightly longer. Not because it changed anything, but because it deserved to be acknowledged. It meant something, I said quietly. Then I added, but that same history includes you telling me you'd choose her every time. Silence. Real silence this time. Because there's no argument against your own words. I believed you then, I continued. A small pause. I still do. That was it. Nothing left to clarify. Nothing left to negotiate. He stood there for a few seconds. Then something in his expression closed off. Not anger. Not sadness. Just acceptance. He adjusted his jacket slightly, like he needed something to do with his hands. Then he nodded once. Short, almost mechanical, and without another word, he turned around and walked away. I watched him go, waited until he reached the end of the walkway. Then I closed the door, locked it. And just like that, it was over again. But this time, it wasn't a break. It was confirmation. After I closed the door, the silence felt different from the first time. Before, it had been clean, almost clinical, like removing something that didn't fit and restoring order. This time, it was heavier. Not because I doubted my decision, but because everything had just been confirmed in the most undeniable way. I stood there for a moment, my hands still resting on the lock, listening to the quiet settle back into place. No footsteps returning. No knock. No second attempt. He didn't try again, and I didn't expect him to. The next few days were uneventful. Work stayed steady. Inspections, reports, early mornings, structured routines. The same rhythm that had carried me through the first break now carried me through the second. But internally, something had shifted. Not emotionally in the way people usually describe heartbreak. There was no lingering sadness, no urge to reach out, no what-ifs. Just recalibration. About a week later, I reached out to Tessa again, this time intentionally. We met at the same coffee place as before. Same table, same neutral space. She sat across from me, already studying my expression like she knew why I had asked to meet. He came back, didn't he? She said. Not a question. A quiet certainty. I nodded. He did. She didn't look surprised. Again. That consistency in her reactions told me more than any explanation could. What happened? She asked. I gave her a shorter version this time. He showed up. Things didn't work out. He wanted stability. I left out the emotional framing, just the structure. Tessa listened without interrupting, then leaned back slightly. That tracks, she said. I tilted my head. How long? I asked. She didn't pretend not to understand. How long was it already like that between him and Olivia? Tessa paused, not to avoid the question, but to choose her words carefully. From what I saw, she said slowly, it didn't start suddenly. I didn't react. I just waited. There were always overlaps, she continued. Time that didn't quite line up. Plans that shifted around her. Late calls that weren't just casual. She glanced down at her coffee for a second. Nothing obvious enough to call out in one moment, she added, but enough that if you were paying attention, you'd notice. I nodded slightly, because that was exactly what I had experienced. Not one big betrayal, just a series of smaller choices that added up over time. Do you think it ever became physical? I asked. She hesitated this time. Longer. I don't have proof, she said, but I wouldn't have been surprised. That was enough. Not because it added something new, but because it confirmed everything I had already pieced together. The timeline. The behavior, the way he answered me that night without hesitation, it all aligned. And what stood out most wasn't what happened after we ended things. It was what had already been happening before, quietly, gradually, while I was still there. After that, there wasn't much else to say. We finished our coffee, talked about neutral things for a few minutes, then left. No dramatic conclusion, just closure, real closure. Over the next couple of weeks, I didn't revisit the situation emotionally. Not because I was avoiding it, but because there was nothing left to process. Everything had already been decided. Everything had already been confirmed. Instead, I did something simpler. I went back over the timeline. Once. Not obsessively. Just enough to check if I had missed anything. If there was a moment where I could have handled things differently, the answer was no. The signs were there. I noticed them. I addressed them directly. I asked a clear question, and I got a clear answer. There was no gap in that process. No misunderstanding that would have led to a different outcome. If anything, delaying would have made things worse, because what was happening didn't start after I left. It was already there. I just chose not to tolerate it once it became undeniable. A few mutual acquaintances reached out during that time. Nothing direct. Just casual messages, checking in, trying to gather context. I kept my responses simple. We had different priorities. That was enough. Because it was true. I heard secondhand that Daniel had been moving between places. Nothing stable, just temporary arrangements. And Olivia? She had moved on as well, focused on her own situation. No long-term connection between them anymore. Again, predictable. Once things required responsibility, everything shifted. And suddenly, what had felt so important before didn't hold. Looking back, the pattern is clear. He prioritized her when it was easy. She left when it wasn't. And when that option disappeared, he looked for the next most stable one, which used to be me. The difference is, I had already removed myself from that position. By the time he came back, there was nothing left to return to. My life now feels normal. Work is steady. My routine is intact. There's no ongoing situation tied to any of this. The last thing I did for completeness was clear out the box of his remaining items. The small things that had blended into the space. I donated what I could, contained of the rest. No reason to keep anything that might reopen a door that was already closed. And that was it. No loose ends. No unresolved conversations. Just finished. At this point, I'm not dealing with an ongoing situation. Everything that needed to happen has already happened. Everything that needed to be decided has already been decided. There's no contact, no overlap, no connection left. So the question I've been asking myself isn't emotional. It's logical. Did I miss anything? From where I stand, I asked a clear question. I received a clear answer, and I acted in alignment with it. When he came back later under different circumstances, I stayed consistent. If there's a flaw in that approach, I'd rather see it now. But the more I think about it, the more I realize something simple. The outcome wasn't determined when he showed up at my door. It wasn't even determined at that dinner. It was determined in my kitchen. The moment I asked him where I stood, and he told me. Everything after that was just the result of believing him.